Alright, so we're going to be doing a tutorial on the arteries of the spine, okay? Remember I did that other video for the IVF borders, okay? So take a look at that, and if you have any questions, let me know. We're going to kind of skip forward a little bit, and we're going to be looking about page 22, okay? So we're going to just talk about the spinal arteries at the segmental level. Go ahead and review this about a page before that. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, let me know, okay? So spinal arteries, again, segmental, just meaning at the levels of the spine, okay? The spinal artery is another guy to kind of keep in mind too, because it gets enveloped in the epineurium with that mixed spinal nerve traversing the IVF, okay? So when it gets enveloped like that, technically it's in the subarachnoid space, okay? So again, just something to keep in mind, because that dura and that arachnoid follow that nerve out from the cord to the IVF, okay? Osseous branches are going to stay in the epidural space. They're going to connect up with those nutrient foramina, right? Those little pinholes on the vertebral bodies that you see in lab. The anterior spinal canal arteries and the posterior spinal canal arteries, okay? I'm going to emphasize the canal part of it. Those are way outside the dura, okay? So they're in the epidural space. Don't want to get these guys confused with the spinal arteries that are running longitudinally, okay? Which we'll talk about in a minute. So recognize the anterior spinal canal arteries, okay, is in the anterior part of the canal, but it's near the back of the body, right? Back of the vertebral body, which is where the posterior longitudinal ligament lives, okay? That's why I have behind PLL there, okay? Keep that in mind too with the posterior spinal canal arteries, okay, because they're going to be near the ligamentum flavum, right? In the back of the canal, okay? So just keep your head on straight, spatial awareness, right? Next little guy here, radicular arteries. I always think R and R, right? Radicular root, especially that dorsal root ganglion seems to kind of pop up quite a bit. Again, subarachnoid space, all right? Now the medullary feeders, right? We said medullary is medulla, middle, marrow, if you will, Latin terms, right? So these guys are actually pretty key. So I don't know why I have a company root there. It's not really what I meant to say. But they connect that anterior and posterior spinals to like the segmental arteries, okay? And they're not, and you see there are 9 anterior and 12 posterior vessels not paired left and right. It's because if I zoom in here and kind of make a picture, so here's our vasa corona, vasa corona, vasa corona, right? Different levels there. We'll do orange for anterior spinal, all right? There's our anterior spinal. And we'll do green for posterior spinals, because then we can kind of tell them apart a little bit easier, right? So there's our posterior spinals. And now our pink here is our medulla, or our medullaries. So we got one maybe here, right? And then we got one maybe here and maybe here. That just happens to be kind of paired. Let's do it like this, you know, and one here, etc., right? So then they kind of come back to the segmental levels and exit, segmental levels and exit, okay? So there's no real rhyme or reason there. But when we get further into the material, we're going to talk about the artery of Adamkowitz. Okay, I just got a little note on the side here. T9 and 10, kind of a heavy hitter when we get to that point in the notes, but just kind of planting the seed now, okay? So keep that stuff in mind. Let's talk about the longitudinal guys, okay? So again, these are going to be a big portion of this, especially compare and contrast to the canal arteries, okay? So you talk about anterior spinal artery, okay, from the vertebral artery, and when in between C3 and C6 we have these, we usually have the left and right spinal, anterior spinal artery joining together, okay, to kind of get this Y shape, if you will, right? So above that though, we have this four variation, kind of like I have drawn here, okay? We're going to have 2 anterior, okay, spinal arteries and 2 posterior spinal arteries, okay? So that'd be like from occiput to C2, right? Because these 2 anterior arteries haven't come together yet. But once they come together around C3 to C6, we only have 1 anterior, okay? So keep that in mind. Just good, easy stuff, okay? You used to use these words like, or acronym like AMLAT and PLAT, but it's really old stuff. I haven't seen it in a long time, so don't sweat it. Also, I did mention an anterior spinal artery coming from vertebral, but these are branches from those medullary feeders, okay? So technically, the anterior spinal artery is not one single vessel, even when there's a left and right. Think of it as like many vessels stacked on end, okay, creating a long tube, if you will. All right, so kind of branch, 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 and creating a long vessel, all right? Now, the posterior spinal arteries are coming from the posterior inferior cerebellar arteries, okay? Very, very good test question. Help you out with NMS once you get there, okay? Again, PLLAT, kind of old news, but do what you want. Again, not a single or continuous vessel. These are united branches from the posterior medullary feeders, okay? Got the same idea as before. And we talked about this arterial vasa corona, right? Corona crown, okay? Made up of these longitudinal vessels, right? The posterior and the anterior spinals, plus the communicating arteries going between them, okay? So recognize you're going to have 4 communicating when you have this 4 configuration over here, but only 3 down here, right? So just keep your head on straight with all that kind of stuff, where you are in the spine, right? Okay, so then we have some intramedullary arteries. Again, I have written, this is just kind of a general term, but our main ones here are going to be the central sulcal perforating arteries, right? The one that kind of goes right down the middle, branching off from the anterior spinal. Okay, and this supplies 2/3 of the cord, 2/3 of the cord, 2/3 of the cord, okay? Big, big, big concept there. Now with the PO plexus, though, we have the posterior spinal arteries and the communicating, kind of creating a plexus network, right? So we have the PO perforating arteries, and again, if the central sulcal is supplying, 2/3 of the cord, the PO perforating is probably doing the rest, So I have 1/3, but again, just kind of keep that in mind. But the 2/3 is a biggie. Okay, so just kind of outlining our photos again, our pictures from our book, kind of the same idea, right? Talk a little bit about veins here. So pretty much almost the same idea with the veins, right? Almost overlap completely, but we got a couple different guys, okay? So just looking at the PO veins, these are going to drain the venous vasa corona, right? The crown of the veins. And they're, keep in mind, you're draining all this blood out to the IVF. You want to get it out, out, out. So our longitudinals, in our subarachnoid space, we got the longitudinal vein, posterior longitudinal veins, in conjunction with those communicating, giving us that venous vasa corona, the crown, okay? And kind of the same with the veins, or the arteries. The medullaries, okay, are going to drain the venous vasa corona towards out to the IVF. And radicular, again, are going to accompany the roots, drain it out to the IVF. R&R there, okay? Now, out in the epidural space, we have the anterior internal vertebral venous plexus. Mouthful, right? Keep in mind, that's the anterior of the canal, back of the body. So near the posterior longitudinal ligament, just like our canal arteries, okay? Our anterior canal. So, kind of the same idea there. And don't forget that basivertebral vein, right? The big honking hole at the back of the body. Really easy to see in lab. What else we got? So posterior internal vertebral venous plexus. Again, this is at the back of the canal near the ligamentum flavum. And if you ever hear this intervertebral veins, we're just talking at the IVF, right? Because they're kind of all headed out there. So intervertebral veins. And then I did mention this in tutorial, but keep this in mind, as far as clinical practice goes, but there's no valves in the veins of the vertebral column. So when you have all these malignant spread, not all these, but if you do have malignant spread, could easily, with all this collateral circulation of the spine, spread, a lot more easily than, say, other areas of the body. I'll kind of leave you with this outline. This is just kind of my way of grouping it together, but another thing to keep in mind is not just the vessels, but what else is filling the empty space as far as fluids go. So in the epidural space, you see we have the interstitial fluid. In the subdural, that's a potential space, right, nice and tight with the serous fluid. And then subarachnoid, we have that CSF, right, spinal taps. We'll talk more about dentate ligaments and Hoffman ligaments even the recurrent meningeal nerve supplying the disc and stuff like that. But for right now, kind of, try to box it up a little bit and see, if you can keep things straight that way. Thanks for watching.